So if you've ever been to Israel on Hanukkah, you may have seen a practice that is not common here. You don't see as commonly here, which is that when you walk the streets, especially in Jerusalem, but also in other places, you'll sometimes see glass boxes with the Chanukiot, the Hanukkah candles shining inside of these glass boxes, right outside of the front doors of people's houses. And for those of us who are not used to this, it's kind of striking and beautiful the way they shine in the box. That's not a practice that we see often in our communities here in the diaspora. And though I will say, every so often you do see someone who does it that way. I remember that actually one of my cousins used to live down the block, one of my first cousins. And I remember going over to their house and they would light in a glass case right outside their front door, Israeli style, you could say. Anyways, fast forward a little, they actually made Aliyah, so maybe that was a leading indicator of their practice. But one of the things we're going to look at tonight is this practice of lighting the menorah outside your home. Where does it come from? Why don't we do it that way today, at least most of us? Um, okay, so let's go all the way back. Um, Actually, it seems that this was probably the original custom. The oldest sources that talk about the lighting of a Chanukiah seem to expect that we're going to light outside. So, for example, the Gemara in Shabbat, which is kind of like the main place in the Gemara that talks about the laws of Hanukkah in Kaf Aleph Amud Bet. It says there, Tanu Rabbanan, Ner Chanukah mitzvah lehanicha al petach beito mibachutz. We learn in a Braita that it's a mitzvah to place your Chanukiah at the entrance of your house outside. And then it says, Im hayadar ba'aliyah, if you lived upstairs, manicha b'chalon hasmucha l'reshut harabim. Then in that case, then you place your Hanukkah candles in the window that faces the public domain. Uveshata sakana, but in a time of danger, manicha al shulchano v'dayo. In that time, in a time of danger, then you just place your Hanukkah candles on a table, and that is sufficient. Okay, so that's the beginning of this Braita said, that it's a mitzvah. It says, Ner Chanukah mitzvah l'hanicha al petach beito mi bachutz. The mitzvah is to do it at the entrance of your house outside. And the same practice also appears in Masechet Sofrim. That's a little later than the Gemara, one of the kind of minor tractates compiled a little bit later than Shas. There we read, Ner Chanukah mitzvah l'hanicho bepetach hasamuch l'rashut harabim. When it comes to the candle of Hanukkah, it's a mitzvah to place it at the entrance of someone's home next to the public domain. Sheteheh mezuzah biyamin v'ner Hanukkah mismol, so that the mezuzah should be on the right side of the door and the Hanukkah candle should be on the left side of the door. Lekayem mashne amar, and then it quotes a pasuk from Shir Hashirim. So that we saw the Gemara itself. Then we saw that the second source from Masechet Sofrim. And then if you think about it, there's actually only one place in the entire Mishnah that refers to the lighting of a candle on Hanukkah. We talked about this in a Hanukkah or in a Kislev Shiur a few years ago. We went through all the sources, early sources relating to Hanukkah. It was surprising how little the Mishnah talks about Hanukkah. But the one place in the Mishnah that does talk about lighting Hanukkah candles is a case in the Mishnah in Bava Kama, which is not where you expect to find a discussion of Hanukkah, because that has to do with all types of, more civil law. But anyways, in the sixth chapter of Bava Kama, it talks about a case of a camel that's walking around with a bundle of flax on its back. And the Mishnah discusses basically who's liable if the flax on the camel's back catches fire from a lamp in front of someone else's property. And then at the end of that Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda comes along and he clarifies. He says, if the fire that lights the flax on fire is from a Hanukkah candle, then the owner of the camel carrying the flax is liable. Why? Because at that time of year, when you load up your camel and have it walk around, you should be aware that there are candles outside. And therefore, you need to take extra precautions. Anyways, the assumption is that Hanukkah candles are outside, right? So, okay, very interesting. Now, from all these early sources, it sure seems that the expectation, maybe the optimal way of lighting, lechatchila, is to light outside of your door. We read a couple of times, mitzvah to do it that way. Seems like that's the optimal way to do it. So why is that? The Masechet Sofrim gave that beautiful kind of mezuzah on one side, Hanukkah candle on the other side. That was very beautiful, and it kind of gave that drash based on the line in Shir Hashirim. But another reason given, maybe a simpler reason given, is Rashi says that lighting outside is because of Pirsume Nisa, in order to publicize the miracle. That when you light outside, or you kind of bring the celebration of the holiday out of your home and into the public domain where everyone can see that that's a greater publicizing of the miracle, and that's why we do it outside, at least optimally. Sure, if you live in the upper story of a building, what can you do? You can't just light it outside your front door. So in that case, we say do the best you can. Light it in your window so that people can see it. And sure, if it's dangerous out there, then what can you do? Don't put your life at risk. Don't put yourself at risk. In that case, it's okay to light inside on your table, kind of inside. But basically, if you can swing it, it sounds like the right way to do it optimally is to light outside. So the question is, why don't we do that? If that's what all these earliest sources guided us to, why is it that we don't typically do that? We light inside of our homes. Okay, so how did this come to be the common practice, at least in the diaspora, certainly um, among Ashkenazim? Okay, so first, we should point out that the custom or the practice of lighting indoors has been around for a long time. Lighting inside is not like some kind of newfangled thing. Already in the times of the Rishonim, so back in the medieval period, we find that there are different poskim, legal authorities, who mention that the common practice in their time and place was that people lit Hanukkah candles indoors. So, for example, the Or Zarua lived in Vienna in the 1200s, and he mentions that it was customary in his community to light indoors. Similarly, the Shibbolei Haleket also lived in the 1200s. He lived in Rome, so same time period, but different location. In Rome, he attests to the same common practice of lighting indoors. That seems to be how it was done in Europe at the time. People lit indoors. Now, on the other hand, the Shulchan Aruch, so that's Rabbi Yosef Karo living in the Holy Land, the land of Israel, in Tzfat. A bit later, in the 1500s, when he writes the Shulchan Aruch, he just brings down the statement of the Gemara that says that you should light the candles outside. And presumably that's what people did in Tzfat in his community, that they must have lit outside. But when the Ramah, right, the Ramosh Isserles, kind of commenting on the Shulchan Aruch. So he's contemporary, right? Also in the 1500s, but he's the Ramaz living in Krakow in the 1500s. He comments there that it was the common practice where he was living, basically in the communities of Ashkenaz in Europe, to light indoors. Okay, so even let's say in the 1500s, by that time, this divide existed. Some communities maybe common practice among the Sephardic poskim who would follow the Shulchan Aruch, and certainly in the land of Israel, seem to continue the original practice of lighting outdoors. That's consistent with, as we saw, the earliest was to light indoors. So what explains the Ashkenazi practice? Why did we start lighting indoors? So some Achronim tried to explain that they said, well, we must have started lighting indoors because it was dangerous to light outdoors. Maybe it was just too dangerous in Europe to light your candles outside. And so maybe that explains why the custom moved toward lighting indoors there. Maybe. Okay, maybe that's the case. But before we fall in love with that explanation, um, let's just quote the Aruch HaShulchan, who lived in Lithuania. He's living in the late 1800s. And here's the question as he asks it. He basically he says, these days, he says, behold, now we do not light outside, even though there is no danger for us. Okay, so that's his question. He says, I'm living in Lithuania, I'm living in Ashkenaz, and I see that people are lighting indoors, and I don't understand because it's not actually dangerous. And yet, people are lighting indoors. What's that about? He says that danger can't be the explanation. Okay, so what might it be? So he gives a totally different explanation. He says, and this is a quote, he says, because in our lands, uh, he says, in our lands, the days of Hanukkah are days of inclement weather, rain and snow and strong winds. And it's impossible to place them outside, to place the candles outside, unless one encloses them in glass. And the sages did not trouble us that much. And furthermore, with this using of a glass case, it makes the mitzvah less publicized. Okay? And also, not in all places will they allow such a thing to be done. Not totally clear what that means. Maybe for safety reasons. Maybe there's some other reason, like maybe you're just not allowed to light candles outside. Um, Maybe that's dangerous. Anyways, therefore, we all light in the house. Basically, Aruch HaShulchan says that in his day, he saw that people lit in their homes. And he actually makes an interesting point. He says that what he saw often people would do is that they would light inside the house, right inside the front door. So that's interesting that they would light right inside the front door because they still wanted to maintain that idea of the mezuzah on one side and the menorah on the other side. But instead of doing it outside the front door, they would light it inside the front door. Okay, interesting. And he does not like that. So Aruch HaShulchan says he does not like that way of practicing. He says that if once you're going to light inside, then the whole idea of by the doorway goes away. So don't like light it just inside your doorway. Rather, he says, what you should do is you should light in the window, in the house, in the window, facing the street in order to publicize the miracle. And that, I would say, is the common practice. That is what you see most often today. Okay, so let's just summarize, kind of what we've seen so far, because kind of the first half here, we're talking about the halachot of lighting inside versus outside, and then in the second half, we're gonna think about that in a little bit more of a deep way. Okay, but just to summarize what we've seen so far, it seems that the original custom um, was to light Hanukkah candles outside your front door. Lighting outside is considered more public, and it has this added benefit of surrounding the door of your house with mitzvot, the mezuzah, and the menorah on each side of the door. The Sephardic poskim, following the Shulchan Aruch, written in the land of Israel, retained, let's say, the fidelity, to that practice. In Ashkenazi communities, in the diaspora, dating a long time back, even to the times of the Rishonim, it seems it was already common practice to light indoors, maybe for safety reasons, maybe for weather reasons. It's not entirely clear. Where safety concerns were not a factor, the custom nevertheless remained to light indoors. And some people maybe literally did it inside their doorway, but over time, it seems that the custom came to be what we do, which is that we light indoors, but in the window for all to see. And today in Israel, the custom of lighting outside it is alive. The custom has been taken on even by some people who in the Ashkenazi community. Maybe because the weather there is better than it was in Europe, maybe because it's safer there than it was in Europe, maybe because in Israel the public domain is Jewish as well. So we light outside. In the diaspora, the public domain is not ours. and we light inside. In our own country, we bring the holiday out into the street where it can be shared together. Okay, so that is the history and kind of the halachot of where to light. So now let's go one level deeper. Let's learn something a little bit Hasidish. So the Sfas Emes, that is the Ger Rebbe, Rav Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter. He kind of riffs on this topic a little bit, and he takes it in a more spiritual direction. So back in the year 1876, on the second night of Hanukkah, Sfas Emes asked the same question that we've been grappling with, basically. He says, these days in Europe in 1876, why do we light Hanukkah candles inside our houses rather than outside the way that the Gemara implied that we were meant to do? And here's his reason. Here's the reason that he gives. He says that in the Galut, in the diaspora, the exterior penetrates the interior. Sfas Emes is always very mysterious in the way that he writes. You have to kind of read it and read it again. Okay. The exterior in the diaspora, the exterior penetrates the interior, meaning in the Galut, things that would normally belong outside your home find their way inside your home. For example, let's just put this in modern context. Pop culture starts outside your home, but it winds up inside your home. Cultural norms seep in. Foreign things that start out on the outside wind up penetrating the inside. Chitzoniyut, he would say, foreignness. The ways of the street make their way into your home. That is the way of the diaspora. And this theme, this turns out to be a theme that Sfas Emes uses in a bunch of different places in his kind of meditation on Hanukkah and what it's about. He says elsewhere, the Greeks just wanted us to be normal. They wanted us to be like everyone else. They wanted, you could say, the external voice of Greek culture to become the internal voice of what we hear in our own heads, in our own, and what we talk, the way that we talk in our own homes. And that's why, he says, the Greeks focused on trying to nullify three mitzvot that make us different. Shabbat, Brit Milah, and Rosh Chodesh, having our own calendar. So they just wanted us to be normal. And he points out that in Alanisim, we say that the Greeks went into the temple, and we say V'tim'u et kol hashmanim, and they made all the pure oil impure. Sfas Emes asks, what's that about? Why would the Greeks run around the Beit HaMikdash? Why would they run around the temple defiling all the oil? It makes sense if they would have taken all the oil, but why would they run around defiling it? Sfas Emes says, this is a metaphor. The Jews, he says, are like oil. Oil separates from water. Oil rises to the top. The Greeks, he said, wanted us to just mix in and just blend in, basically to stop being different. They wanted us to stop separating like oil. They ran around the temple touching all of the oil. Okay? So, again, the Sfas Emes says, in the diaspora, the external finds its way into our homes, into our own psyches. Basically, when you're a minority, the influence of the dominant culture is just unyielding. It's in the air that you breathe. So that's why, says the Sfas Emes, in the diaspora, we light Hanukkah candles indoors. He says that in the diaspora, we have to start by lighting inside our homes. You might say inside ourselves. In the diaspora, the most important thing is to publicize the miracle internally. Pirsume Nisa actually is directed internally. So your home represents your family life also. And so here's another way of putting Sfas Emes's point. So we all know that if you don't have the fire inside, okay, if you don't have the fire inside your home, then your kids will see that. And you might do a whole lot of things outside your home. You might send your kids to Jewish school. You might schlep them to shul every Shabbos, okay? But if inside your home, the candles aren't burning. If the fire is not burning inside your home, then nothing that you do outside will work. That's another way of saying Persume Nisa begins at home, right? Persume, like publicizing the miracle begins internally. And similarly, on a personal level, you could also say that if you go through the motions of your Judaism externally, right, kind of facing outside to the street, but the fire is burning inside, then similarly it won't work. You can look very from outside, but if you don't have the fire inside, then Sfas Emes would say, then the Greeks have won. Okay, if it again in the diaspora, especially the fire needs to begin inside. We need to publicize the miracle of Judaism, you could say, the miracle of everything that we do internally to our families and to ourselves. And only once the fire is lit inside, then you can take it outside. Okay, so a beautiful thought from Sfas Emes. And in another place, he quotes something from his grandfather. So his grandfather also, the prior Ger Rebbe, Chiddushei Harim, what his grandfather went by. So the Chiddushei Harim had a famous play on words. He says, how will you know if you're lighting the fire correctly? How far do you have to go in lighting the fire of the Hanukkah candle? So the Gemara in Shabbat, also in Kaf Aleph, also in that same location where so much of Hanukkah is discussed. The Gemara asks, what is the time of Hanukkah candles being lit? Okay, what's the time period of lighting Hanukkah candles? So the Gemara says, Mishe Tishka Hachama, from sunset, basically, Ad Shetichle Regel Minashuk. Literally, that means until traffic in the marketplace ceases. Ad Shetichle Regel Min Hashuk. Until people stop walking around outside in the market. Chiddushei Harim says that this line, Ad shetichle regel min hashuk, until the traffic leaves the marketplace, he interprets that to mean something deeper. He says what we should interpret this to mean is until regel. Okay, Ad shetichle regel, until regel, that which is ragil, that which is regular, that which is mundane, that which is habitual, until all the things that are regel, habitual, uninspired, just mundane and normal, until all of that has been vanquished from the shuk. Okay? Ad shetichle regel min hashuk. Keep lighting your Hanukkah candles until all that is habitual and mundane and normal, all of that has been vanquished from the shuk, from your daily life. Okay, so that's a beautiful thought. We need the Hanukkah candles to be lit until all the things that we do by rote and that seem common to us, until all of those habits are uplifted and enlightened. And that's the period in which we must keep lighting the candles. Okay, beautiful. So let's just sum it up. Let's quickly recap what we saw tonight. We started with the halachot of where to light Hanukkah candles. And we saw the original custom, presumably the ideal way to do it lechatchila. That is to light outside your front door. Maybe this is because of Persume Nisa, to publicize the miracle by taking it out into the public domain. Maybe this is to surround the entrance of your home with mitzvot on both sides of the doorway. Okay, we saw that this custom fell out of practice in Ashkenaz, and perhaps that was because of safety, and perhaps that was because of weather. The Sephardic poskim, following the Shulchan Aruch, continue to bring down the original custom of lighting outside. And in Israel today, you see this practice kind of come to life again, even among some Ashkenazim. Maybe the weather in Israel is just better. Maybe it's safer there. But on a deeper level, in Israel, as we said, the public domain is ours. It's ours to light up together. Israel is a place where You don't have to just keep the performance of mitzvah inside. There's this idea in the diaspora sometimes of being, in the extreme way of saying it is a man in the street and a Jew in the home. Certainly in Israel, no reason for that distinction. So in Israel, the public domain, we bring the mitzvah out into the public domain. Okay, and then we saw the Sfas Emes's beautiful explanation of why we light a fire inside, why it's important that we light a fire inside our homes. You could say inside of ourselves, because external influences, maybe you could say of the surrounding culture that we live in, the external seeps into our homes and maybe even into ourselves. And the Sfas Emes says that in the Galut especially, Pirsume Nisa begins inside. Start by lighting a fire in your home and in yourself, and then once you have that, then you can take it outside. And finally, to remind us, how much do you need a light? Ad shetichle regel minashuk. Until you recognize that nothing is ordinary, nothing should be rote, nothing is mundane. Basically, we need to keep lighting candles until all aspects of our lives are full of light. Okay, so that's a few thoughts for the upcoming holiday. It should be a good one for all of us.